This is Ground Affected. My name is Brent, and welcome to a little tear in your FVP sheet. In a recent video, I had painted this Superman bust, and in that video, all I wanted to show you was how I painted the skin tones and the face of this specific bust. Mainly because I was updating my own personal preferences for skin painting and painting of faces, really. And on that video, I got quite a few comments asking me, how did I paint the black and grey that you see in this picture? Now, there isn't anything too fancy about this, but I figured this would be a good time to show you how I paint a Zenithal highlight. That's all this really is. But when painting a Zenithal highlight, most people think that you should just paint it directly from the top, which is technically correct. But you can also use a Zenithal type of method to create volumetric highlights on the model so that you get a look that looks a little bit more like a black and grey painting as opposed to just a plain old Zenithal. First off, let's talk about Zenithal highlighting. What is it used for? Why do we need a Zenithal highlight? And this is something that comes from the miniature painting world. And in the miniature painting world, a lot of the times the details are super fine, really small, and the last thing you want to do is gunk them up with paint so you can't see them. Now, this is an important thing, even taking it onto larger models. However, you're probably going to get away with a lot more gunking of your paint than you are on a miniature. You're just not going to notice it. If you notice the light change, that is just because my light just went flat, so it's okay. I replaced it with another one. Let's continue with the video. So the main reason for having a Zenithal highlight is the fact that you can place thinner coats of paint over the top of that, thus allowing your details to stand through and show through the paint without gunking up the area with too much paint or too thick of a paint at the end of the day. Now, to use a Zenithal, it's probably best to use it with thinner paints, that way your paints actually show through. Almost all paints are transparent in some kind of way. Not all paints are completely opaque. Some paints are, but most, if not majority of the paints that we use for model painting are actually transparent in some way, shape or form. So if you know that, if you place down a transparent color over the top of black, you're going to get a darkened version. And if you've watched previous videos of mine, you would know that black is a desaturated color. So essentially all you're doing is desaturating the color that you place over the top of black. By placing a white or a gray highlight over the top of the black, what you're doing is increasing the value so that the color you lay over the top of that has already got its value increased, has already got a good head start on covering, and your transparency is not showing black through, is showing gray, thus being a little bit less desaturated and perhaps a little bit more brighter. This is more particular in things like light colors like orange, yellow, greens, stuff like that, where the colors are bright and they don't cover specifically well. So the absolute simplest way of doing a Zenithal highlight is to paint your model completely black, and once it's been painted black, you spray a white or a light gray from the top, or essentially from the area your light is coming from. I can show you sort of how that light would look. For example, if I were to zenithally highlight my face in this scene, you can see that the light is only casting a direct light down onto the model, if I was a model. But if I move the light down, you now notice that the light is directly on my face. It's also in front of the camera so you can't see, so I will move it just slightly out the way. But that light now hits my face and it casts a shadow in the back areas of my body. This creates depth, or essentially what we would call a volumetric highlight. So by adding the light and making the background darker, we're creating depth in the piece. And this is something you can carry forward into your model painting as well. And luckily for me, my primer of choice is already black. So the best thing to do if you're going to do something like this, you want to start off with a black, but that doesn't limit you to a black. You can start off with a dark purple, a dark green, a dark blue, any color that you really want. It doesn't have to be black and white as your Zenithal. You could essentially apply this to any color you want. So you could do, for example, a dark green and use a yellow as your highlight over the top of that, and it would give you the same effect underneath the paint that you're about to put on top. In fact, you can use that effect to your advantage, and you can create new colors from the blends that are created by layering colors over other colors. I make sure that I have a solid base coat. Once my entire model is solidly blacked out, then I'm going to allow it to dry good and proper. If you are using a different colored primer and you want to do the exact same effect that I'm doing, then you can also use a black paint on top of your primer. Let's say your primer is only a gray, you can use a black paint on top of that. Just in my case, my primer is already black. For the white of this, I'm going to be using an ink. The reason I'm using an ink is because it's more transparent than a normal paint. And the reason that this is good is because I can build up on top of this. So one layer of this ink is going to create a sort of medium gray, and another layer over the top is going to be a light gray, and one more layer is going to be almost white. So I can slowly build up the shadows and highlights in this exact way. I pick a side for the light to come from, and I start to highlight volumetric areas. Essentially, the light doesn't only just hit from the top. It hits your forehead, it hits your shoulders, it hits your chest, it hits your stomach. So I will highlight those areas very specifically. I also did a Zenithal on the top of this Space Marine that's still attached to its sprue, just so that you can see how I would apply this even on a small miniature. Basically, it is just helping to create volume and highlights and shadows with a little bit less effort later on in the painting process. Now hopefully you picked up something out of this video that will help your model painting in the future. And yes, this wasn't the most craziest of techniques, but this is a technique you can use to your advantage, or even just to use to create something slightly more unique, pretty much like that. I know a lot of people are probably wanting to paint a bunch of moon knights since the video has just come out recently, and if you are trying to do that, this may be an extremely good way for you to set up the base of your moon knight painting. So if you figured out anything new in this video and you feel like you need to share it with someone, we all know the best person you can share it with is probably your gran. And when you're done sharing it with your gran, you're already down at the bottom of the video, you might as well click the like button, and if you haven't already, click subscribe, just so that you don't miss out on more bangers like this in the future. And now I'd like to thank my patrons for all their support over on the Patreon thing. The link for that is in the description. But this week I did get one new Patreon, and I would like to thank them for joining and supporting the cause. Pascal Herabudut. I cannot say names, it does not matter. And speaking of names and words that I cannot say, the best thing you can do is leave some words in that little space at the bottom of the video that YouTube allows you to leave some words in. And of course, if you've managed to make it this far in this video and there was nothing that you liked, there's nothing I can do for you, bruh. But the best thing you can do for yourself is to just click the dislike button and hurry up and f*** off. Now everybody gonna be painting all their models black and grey and calling it Ahr.